Shalom, shalom, and welcome to this continuing series that we're now continuing with Shaarei Halachah, the gate or the way through the Jewish law way of life. Now, we're now in chapter 4, of those of you who have the book. In chapter 4, which is page 18, we're going to be looking at that part of the Jewish life is preparing ourselves for prayer. In prayer, obviously in a community. The community is made up of 10 men, called a minyan. And we're going to look at the aspect of the synagogue. Now, it's very important as we prepare to go into prayer, we need to always remember before whose presence are we coming into. Obviously, when we wake up in the morning, we are conscientious of the fact that when we wake up, God is there. God is not absent from our existence, but sometimes He is from our awareness. So we're called to bring an awareness to ourselves that God is present. This is what it means in Proverbs when it says, "Acknowledge Him and He shall direct thy path," which means that in all thy ways acknowledge Him, no matter what you do, where you're at, and what you're doing. Bring that awareness of God into your life, and by so doing, you bring in God's presence before you. You actually come into His presence. Now, preparation for prayer, minyan, and synagogue is a very important thing in Jewish life. When praying, one is standing in the presence of God, the King of Kings, the Creator, and the person must prepare himself as if he's going to encounter, as it were, as it says in the prophet, God Himself, which is exactly what we're doing. This says in the prophet Amos, chapter 4, verse 12, "Prepare yourself for your God, Israel." Standing before God calls for preparation, contemplation, and inside examination. A person who's preparing to pray should feel as if he's going to meet a very important person, a very important king, as it were, or minister. Preparing oneself means to also dress appropriately in the proper decorum. One should wear the type of clothing and the type of things that a person would go when they go to a meeting with a high official. These preparation prepares a person to stand before the King of the universe and to be impressed upon the significance of our prayer. It is commendable to give tzedakah or charity before praying. This is derived from the verse as it says, "As for me, I will behold your face in tzedek." Interesting word because it's sadi, it's dalet, and it's the whole word kuf that comes out to mean also charity. I will behold your face in charity, or in uprightness, in justice. So whenever the word justice or tzedek is used, tzedakah is implied. We read this also in Tehillim 17:15. The Arizal used to give tzedakah while standing. When he reached the word Ve'ata Moshe Be'kol, you preside over all, in the paragraph of Vayavarech David and the Pesukei de Zimra. Mothers who find it difficult to recite all the prayers because they are caring for the children should ask your local rabbi how to proceed. Now, in particular, women have a particular exemption when it does come to prayer, when it's an issue of time constraints. But nevertheless, they should pray. And the question that was asked earlier by someone, what can a person do, a woman in particular, if they don't have enough time to pray, what should they pray? Obviously, the morning blessings are important. The Shema is obviously important. And the Amidah, the 18 blessings, is of ultimate importance as well. If you can pray the whole thing, fine. But keep in mind, a woman's on a different level than a man, because a woman is constantly praying even when not asked to. She's interceding for her home. She's praying about her husband, the welfare of her home. So she is more concerned about these things that are very close to her, including her own children. So the prohibition to become occupied with extraneous matters become a prohibition. In other words, when you get yourself prepared to go into prayer, we should not be thinking about things that come in from the outside. When it's time to pray in the morning, one should not go visit a friend and greet him before he has prayed, or at least met the obligations of prayer. So if you find yourself, my fellow non-Jewish friend, a Jew that's walking to synagogue and he doesn't say hello to you, don't be offended. That means he has not yet prayed. He's not trying to be offensive on purpose. If one meets a friend in the street, though he may greet him, it is permissible to greet him with shalom. It's customary to say good morning or something similar. This helps one remember that one not to deviate on matters of prayer. Similarly, one should not engage in his profession before or perform any work or travel until he has prayed. In situation of great urgency, however, if one will miss the means of his transportation, or one will miss the means of his livelihood, it is available to be able to do so at a later time if necessary. One should not begin to study Torah once it is time to recite Shacharis. However, if one prays regularly in a minyan, he is permitted to study before prayer. And it's unlikely that it will exceed the permitted time for prayer without praying. One may also study Torah if he asks a friend who is not studying to remind him to pray. There's this prayer time. No. One studies Torah before Shacharit, must recite the Birkas HaTorah, that's the blessing over the Torah, before beginning to study. And we're going to look at that in chapter 3, in section 7, which we saw already prior to this video. Now, one should not eat or drink before praying. However, there are conditions in which a person who is of a frail health may do so. One may drink water, coffee, or tea without milk or sugar if this enables him to concentrate better on his prayer. The opposite is also true if one has a debilitated health situation. A person with high blood pressure, a person with diabetes, a person that has other ailments may do so. One may eat or drink before praying if his health requires it. Praying before praying oneself for prayer, a location suitable for praying. If you do not go for whatever reason to a place of worship, congregation, the Bet Knesset with our 10 men praying, which is the obvious, the best way, you always look somewhere in your home where you can dedicate a place where you have your prayer to Hashem, to God. Both the status of one's body and the place where one recites his prayer and blessing must be in keeping with the holiness or the sanctity of prayer. This is derived from the verse in Psalms 103. My soul shall bless God and all that is within me, his holy name. Therefore, if one needs to relieve himself, he should do so before he begins prayer. Afterwards, he should make sure his body is clean and is fit to stand before God. One who recites the blessings of the studies Torah, the upper part of the body, should be separated from the lower part of the body by a belt or a garment. This is why we don't go praying without a belt. Now, you'll see in the Hasidic community that they take on an additional extension of this commandment, which they'll put a gartel. You'll call it a gartel, or black, you might say like a black sash around, separating the lower parts from the upper part. This was done by the priests that used to serve in the temple. So many have taken upon themselves this custom. Keep in mind the requirements is there's a separation between both parts. A belt to basically tie up your pants and hold up your pants is also considered the same thing. Therefore, one needs to relieve himself. Obviously, you need to go use the bathroom. Make sure you take off whatever that's binding you in that area, so you can be able to use the restroom with no problem. You know, obviously, you want to come back with your hands washed, cleansing, and so forth. Now, the reason for this separation of the belt is that the heart should not see the body nakedness. And this, of course, delves into more of the mystical aspect than anything else. Our sages taught that whenever God is among us, when we are praying or busying with ourselves with Torah study, our surrounding must be holy. That doesn't mean we should have pictures in which we can actually divert our prayers to God to a human image. No, it means it should have, like you'll see in many Sephardic communities, where you have passages of Torah or passages of the prayers, like the Shema Israel. You'll see that actually written out very clearly and posted up in parts of the wall. So this is one of the things. You want to make sure the place is in keeping with the halakhic standard. Our sages actually derive from this verse, for the Lord your God goes out in the midst of your camp, and your camp should be holy. In other words, here we have the idea that it should be clean, not with diapers or smelly things hanging around. Care should be taken care of, and no unpleasant odor or body odors be present either. So make sure before you go to the Bet Knesset to pray, you're at least washed or cleansed, or you perhaps taken a shower, or even more so, the customs of many Jews of old was they would go to the mikvah every morning before prayer. And therefore you want to make sure that there is no waste or things that's detectable in that area. I recommend you reading Deuteronomy chapter 23 verse 14 on this, or Devarim 23:14. Now also similar care must be taken with regards to Torah studies. One may not speak or even think of subjects or pray in the bathroom. See, unlike other religions where they want you to be praising God in every moment, in every second, and everywhere, the sanctity of even the name of God becomes a big issue for us when we even are in the bathroom. We should be absent of such holy matters, since we're doing something that's really not that holy. But it's a necessity of our bodies to let you might say, the food process and goes down the toilet, as it were, or be emptied into the toilet. Now, standing in front of a bathroom or as the door is open is like standing in the bathroom itself. So make sure the bathroom door is closed and you're not in front of it. If one has a reason to question the appropriateness of his surroundings, he must check the place before he's allowed to pray. If one is ill, confined in a hospital, in a situation where it's not possible to observe the laws of clean body and proper surrounding, a rabbi should be consulted concerning what procedure is best to follow. A man may not pray facing an improperly dressed woman. In other words, you don't want to be praying whereas a woman is almost completely unclothed or partially clothed. This becomes an issue of erva, and you're going to hear this term as we get into the idea of modesty. Modesty is anything that could possibly provoke erotic feelings and thoughts. Similarly, a man may not be praying facing a married woman whose hair is uncovered, because it's considered on two levels, according to the Shulchan Aruch. One level is considered immodest. On another level, it was considered erva, erotic temptation to a man, because the beauty of a woman's hair would evoke certain sentiments. Obviously, as we get into those passages of modesty, we're going to take a look at there's different ways of looking at it, from the very, very extreme to the more liberal positions of that as well. Although a man should never listen to a woman singing, he should be particularly careful when he's praying or studying Torah. If one is in a place where a woman is singing, cannot leave the place, or ask her to stop, he may study Torah and pray in that place. However, he should make every effort to concentrate on holy matters that he's occupied with, and pay attention, and not pay attention to the singing, or to the singing. And again, I'm going to bring this point again, because what was considered in the Shulchan Aruch considered erva, in today's modern term may not be considered erva. And we're going to look at that at a later point when we study these matters. But obviously a man who's trying to raise his thoughts on a holy level and sees such things or hears such things, his mind will deviate, and this is the reason we go back on extraneous matters before praying or during praying. Now obviously these are things that can remove our focus to the reason why we come to pray. And one of the important things is that we should raise our holy hands in purity of purpose and action. Our hands refers to our actions. And one of the first thing we do when we go to prayer is utilize actions when talking to God. Now, needless to say, Natilat Yadayim is done before prayer, and we should always wash his hands before prayer, be it in the morning prayer, or in the afternoon prayer, or in the evening prayer. The blessings of Al Natilat Yadayim is not recited after washing one's hand before praying. The only exception is reciting Natilat Yadayim for the blessing of the morning. We looked at that earlier in the previous video. Now the hands must be kept clean. If it gets dirtied or if you touch your feet or your parts, you need to re-wash your hands. One should not pray or recite a blessing with his hands are unclean. After touching his shoes or part of the body must be covered, and after scratching even his scalp, he's scratching his scalp, he needs to go then wash his hands. Parts of the body that must be covered includes the torso, the arms, above the elbow, the legs, and the feet. This is why you'll see many Jews that when they go to the synagogue, they have their talit placed and cover those parts if they have short sleeve shirts, or they'll use a jacket to cover themselves with. One must wash his hands after touching one of these places. If one's hands become unclean while reciting the 18 blessings, Shemano Esrei, he can leave his place and he should go clean his hands either by rubbing them on a garment or on the wall. The palm, the back of the hand to the wrist, and all sides of the fingers should be washed or rubbed. Now, praying with a congregation. When we talk about praying with a congregation, we're talking about a minyan. That means 10 men. Praying with a congregation should make every effort for someone to pray in a congregation which is a community of 10. God accepts our prayers when we pray alone, but communal prayer is much more readily accepted and a greater value. There are reasons when one is excluded from praying at a congregation that exhibits certain behaviors and conducts within it and within its members. But I'm not going to go into that right now, but there are exceptions to these rules. Our sages comments on the verse as, "For me, my prayer is to you, O God, at the time of favor." That's in Psalms 69 verse 14. Now, when is it a time of favor? It's when the congregation prays. Now, obviously, different congregations prays at different times. So you can pinpoint what time is the appropriate time by the congregations that are nearby you. There is another benefit to praying with the congregation, and that is that you are able to say certain blessings that normally you would not be able to say so. For example, the Kaddish, the Kedusha, and the blessings of the Kohanim, which means that that's when they come and they bless the people, the congregation. The Torah reading also is part of being able to recite the blessings of the Torah, and one may only be recited if the congregation is present. These prayers, however, are omitted when one prays by himself. In some cases, by one praying by himself, the prayers are quickly done, and you might say they go straight to the point. In congregational prayers, they tend to be a little bit more lengthy, and they have to relay and wait on others to complete their parts of the prayer. A minyan is a group of 10 or more Jewish men, although there are also female minyans that is only made up of women. And several Orthodox rabbis and modern Orthodox rabbis have made mention of this, that it is permissible for women to be part of a minyan as long as they make themselves the attendants, as it were. Now, the Jewish men are counted from the age of 13 years of age and up, or older. Those who pray, and they're counted. All 10 men, including the Shliach Zibor, the one who's sent by the congregation to lead the prayers, must pray in one place. There cannot be walls dividing them. If some of the men are in one room and the rest are in another room, they are not counted as a group. They're actually counted as two separate. Even if there is an opening between the two rooms, there are certain situations where men in two separate rooms can be combined to form a minyan. For example, in a situation where there's great urgency, if some of the men in each room can see each other, they can be counted as one minyan. Now, when a minyan reaches Kaddish or Kedusha, anyone hearing them, even if it's in another room or is distance away, may join them by answering Amen or Amen Yehei Shmei Rabbah. The reason why people are not part of the minyan are permitted to join in answering is because the presence of the divine is where there is a minyan. Once it is present, even an iron wall cannot separate between Israel and their Father in heaven. And this we learn in the Talmud Pesachim 85b. Now, one should make every effort to come to the synagogue on time so he can recite the entire service with the minyan. The most important prayers to recite with a minyan, and this is why my answer to the women as well as to the men is the Shemoneh Esrei. If a person came late, he should try to catch up so he can be able to gain and arrive at the point where the Shemoneh Esrei the 18 benedictions are recited with everyone else. We're going to look more about this in chapter 7 when we get there. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nihiyah v'vero. Now, we're looking at page 21. One who's able to join a minyan in synagogue cannot gather 10 men to pray with him at home, should try to pray at the same time as the minyan in the synagogue, since it is that time a time of favor, as we saw earlier. Now, what do we do about when a boy and a girl becomes a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah? A boy becomes obligated in the commandment or the mitzvah and is counted in a minyan after the age of 13, or complete years after passage since his birth, according to the Jewish calendar. Here are some examples of this halachah. If a boy was born, for example, on the first day of Nisan, even if he was born at the end of the day, he becomes bar mitzvah, or obligated to observe mitzvot at the beginning of the night of the first of Nisan. That doesn't mean that necessarily he's going to be having his bar mitzvah that day, but he becomes obligated in the age of 13 years and on. If a boy was born on the 20th of Adar, and we are going to look through each of the month of the Jewish calendar and how they correlate with the non-Jewish calendar in what period of time. But if a boy was born on the 12th of Adar in a regular year, which was only 1 month of Adar in the year he becomes 13 is a leap year, his bar mitzvah is on the 20th day of the second month of Adar. If a boy was born in the first month of Adar during a leap year, and in the year he becomes 13 is also a leap year, his bar mitzvah is in the first month of Adar. If a boy was born in Adar during a leap year and the year becomes 13 is a regular year, he becomes bar mitzvah in Adar, whether he was born in the first or second of Adar. The same rule applies to girls. The only difference is being that she becomes bat mitzvah when 12 years old or full years have passed since her birthday. So in this case, if you hold by female minions, a girl can also attend a female minyan at that age. Same applies. These calculations are done mainly according to the Jewish calendar. Whenever there's a doubt about the Jewish date of birth, you should have it clarified with a local rabbi, and they can be able to determine exactly at what point they become bar or bat mitzvah, or age of adulthood, as it were. And the boy or girl will know on which day they become obligated to observe the commandments as adults. Now, let's look at the synagogue, because the synagogue, literally, it's a Greek word. It means a place of gathering or a place of assembly. In Hebrew, the word is bet knesset. The congregation is considered a kahal. So let's take a look at this synagogue, because the synagogue is a derivative of the Greek word. They went back all the way during the 1st century, where a great number of Jews were assimilated to the Greek culture. The synagogue is a place designated for prayer. Prayer recited there are of great value than prayer recited in other places. Therefore, one should do the utmost to pray in a synagogue with a congregation. And the Rambam says they should do the best they can to do so. If one cannot find a minyan, he has to pray alone. He should nevertheless pray in a synagogue. This is because it is a holy place, and prayer recited there are more acceptable to God. Unless you're going to turn a part of your home or a part of where you reside into as it were, a small synagogue. And by the way, we have seen this done by many rabbis who have opened up their communities and opened up their home to transform their home into, you might say, a bet knesset, a bet place of gathering or meeting. And this we learned even from Avram Avinu, that he opened up his home, his tent, to people, to invite them in, to teach them how to pray, to get them involved in prayer. A person should pray in a set place in a specific synagogue. He should not change places unless there's a good reason for it. It's creating a good custom, a good modem. You feel at home. Once you have that home feeling, you should not move away unless there's some compelling reasons. And there are many compelling reasons why to leave a community, believe it or not. But we won't get into that right now. We know that Abraham had set a place for prayer from the verse, and Abraham woke up early in the morning to go to the place, the makum, where he had stood before the Lord. There was a particular place that Abraham had accustomed himself to be at to pray to God. When one prays at home, he should also pray in a place where he will not be disturbed by other family members. All of this we find in Genesis chapter 19, verse 27. It's a mitzvah to hurry when going to synagogue, as well when one is performing any other commandments of the Torah. It's a mitzvah. This is derived from the verse, let us hasten to get awareness of God. And that's found in the prophet Hosea, chapter 6, verse 3. Hosea, chapter 6, verse 3. I will run along the way of your commandments, says Tehillim 119, verse 32. However, when a person leaves the synagogue, he should go slowly, and unless he's on his way to study or perform another mitzvah, one should not rush away, run out of the synagogue. Not only that, it is the way you leave the synagogue that is also very important. Most people have not created the awareness that when you leave the synagogue, you don't leave facing your back towards the teva or towards where the Torah scrolls are kept. You always face it forwards, and you walk backwards until you exit out of the synagogue. In most cases, this is the way it's best done, unless there's side exits where you're not finding yourself turning your back towards the Torah, towards where the direction of the east, which is considered a bad habit, plus a bit of disrespect to whom you pray to. Very well. This practice of and conduct should be kept with the sanctity of the place. The holiness of synagogue is very great. It's compared to the holiness of the temple, of the Beit HaMikdash. This is derived from the verse, and I have given to them a small sanctuary. That's in Yeskel 11:16. And this is very important because we're going to look later on about the idea of giving maaser, tithing, and how though the temple was destroyed, and technically speaking, to a certain extent, the obligation to give maaser was somewhat disabled. Nevertheless, we're going to see that because our sages tell us that the Bet Knesset is considered a small sanctuary, there is to some or less degrees a requirement or an obligation to sustain your local Knesset, your local assembly, as it were. Our sages explained that these refers to the synagogue and study houses in Megillah 29a, in the verse, and you shall revere my sanctuary, found in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 30. Cautions us also to stand in all of these places wherein God abides. One should conduct in synagogue should be in keeping with that holiness, that sanctity. A person should not behave frivolously or messing around or double talking, double entendres in the synagogue, or engage in idle talk. Of course, one should shun prohibited speech such as slander, gossip, quarreling. Besides, these are the type of speech being grave sins in themselves, and committing these sins in a holy place multiplies a person's guilt in and of themselves. Committing these sins in a holy place does great harm to the person themselves, causing them to become brazenly hardened before the presence of the divine. A synagogue should not be used for studying. A synagogue should be used only for studying Torah and reciting prayer, and also in gathering people to learn issues of holy matter. Parents should make sure that the children do not make the commotion to disturb the service. Parents should teach their children to sit next to them and behave properly in the synagogue with due respect. And answer also to teach them, because one of the reasons you have children next to you is so they can learn the ways of God as you are setting the example. Amen. Yehei Shemei Rabbah, when they hear the part of the Kaddish. Children who are too young to understand exactly what this is all about, or are unable to behave properly, should not be brought to the synagogue, since they will disturb the adults during the service. And they get used to doing this and desecrating the holiness of the place. One is prohibited to enter a synagogue in order to escape the heat or cold or rain, or just walk right across through it just because it's a shortcut. Never use a place of holy sanctity to be used to get from one end to the other quickly. You have to do it to get from point A to point B. Stay there for a little bit, read Torah or say some prayers, then slowly as you exit out. One speaks with a friend who's in synagogue, should enter the synagogue, recite a verse of Torah or passage from any of the religious writings, and then speak with a friend. If he does not know how to recite any verse, he should at least sit down for a moment, because just sitting in the synagogue alone is a mitzvah. Let me say that again. Just sitting alone in the synagogue in itself is a mitzvah. And that mitzvah is to gather with others of the same faith. Now, one should not walk through a synagogue, which I mentioned earlier, as a shortcut, nor may one walk through a synagogue because it's quicker than walking around it. It's a mitzvah for those who enter the synagogue to pray or study Torah and to leave another door, thereby showing showing that he loves the place that he's at. It's also forbidden to eat, drink, or sleep in a bet knesset or a bet midrash, unless there's an exception to the rule. Unless a person is a Torah scholar who studies in a bet midrash and cannot move away except but to study and may fall asleep or nap or whatever. A person may eat and sleep there since leaving to eat or sleep causes him to lose precious study time. Now let me say something about holy books. Both in the home, we Jews gather and we read. We have our own collections of books that we read, reference material, prayer books, Torah books. Holy books and religious articles must be accorded their due respect. And here are some basic rules, as it were, of how to behave in front of them. One should not sit on the chair or bench and leave them there while the books are lying there. All the holy books, including those that are worn out, as well as sheets of paper that are torn or removed from it, the Torah thoughts were written, may not be thrown out. They must be put in a geniza. A geniza is a special place where they're buried. For example, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, a lot of these Dead Sea Scrolls were holy work that basically through time and aging basically were worn out, could not be used anymore for proper service, and therefore a lot of the letters that were there were missing, they crumbled out, they just basically worn out. So they can't throw such things away. So what do? They basically put them in a, as it were, in a jar or a place for burial. They're treated with holy respect, just like your body is to be treated with holy respect. And I've spoken about the idea of cremation, that is something that many people do, many Jewish people do, and they should not be doing that, because your body is considered a holy habitation of the divine's breath. So therefore you can't just burn your body. If you do so, it's an indication, and you're demonstrating a denial of the fact that you were made in a level of holiness, and that you're saying to God, God, my body's not holy, I'm desecrating it. And God will not hold guiltless that person that decides to go that route. This is why we should get the message out. And I have videos on this, that cremation, for anybody who is a Jew, anybody who believes in one God, should not be involved in cremation, should not allow anybody else to get cremated if they truly believe in God. Of course, this is completely contrary to what a lot of pastors are teaching, and a lot of other more liberal leadership in the Jewish communities are teaching, that yeah, you can go ahead and cremate because it's cheaper. After all, you're going to go to the same place anyhow. No, my friends, you have to give due respect to the body which God entrusted you with. Your body is a holy habitation. Now, they put this in a special burial, and many synagogues have a special box and place where these books and papers are set aside until they actually take into the burial cemetery, Jewish cemetery, to bury. Holy books may not be placed face down. If you see a book that is placed face down, please pick it up and turn it right side up. Chumash, which is the 5 books of Moses, may be placed on top of a volume of the Nevi'im or Ketubim, and Nevi'im and Ketubim may be placed one on top of the other. The Nevi'im, the prophets, and the Ketubim, the writings, may not be placed on top of the Chumashim. So other holy books must not be placed on top of any other of these books. Paper which have no religious significance should not be inserted in the holy books unless they facilitate, as it were, a marker to hold your place in there. A person who is studying from a holy book should not leave the book open when he leaves, even if he expects to return shortly. Make sure you close the book. Another thing, if you're in your home and you have holy books in your book, you are not to remove your clothes in front of it. It is a disrespect for these holy items. Well, we have finished this chapter 4, of our preparation for prayer, for praying in the synagogue, the importance of a minyan, and what have you. In our next video, we're going to be looking at the commandments of tzitzits, of the fringes that hangs on the corner of the talit katan. We're going to talk about that, and the talit gadol. Continue watching these videos, and as we continue, by the end of the series, you should have known enough to be able to complete your conversion process. If there is additional specific areas, we are going to be covering a lot of areas to prepare you, the convert to be ready to be able to face a Bet Din, answer the questions, know Judaism to the level that you need to know it, so you can become a observant, brand new born again Jew. Shalom, shalom to you and to all watching this video.